Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Thought I'd do a video today and use my screen recorder to show you some things about the three different streaming services. Well, the three that I have the most experience with: Tidal, Qobuz, and Amazon. Now I do use Spotify and Pandora as well, but those are not really considered the audiophile realm, although it's debatable whether most people can tell the difference. But I'm going to focus on those three: Tidal, Qobuz, and Amazon today. Not just from a feature standpoint. There's plenty of videos that dive into the features and whatnot, and I'll let you decide on GUI interface and all that. But I wanted to point out just a few things in those areas where I think could be decision makers for you that don't get talked about as much, and then also talk about audibility between the three services and whether or not it's a why. Is it audible or not, and then the why if it is. Not too many people dive into that. And somewhat I'm crowdsourcing this video to get your impressions and feedback as well, but we'll get to that in a second. First thing, go through my history. I mainly started with Tidal outside of Spotify once Tidal was rolled out as the audiophile streaming service, and I was very impressed with their software playback. And I'll tell you, a lot of people like Tidal because of MQA, but for me, it was actually the ability to play the official music videos through the app on Tidal at the higher streaming rates that Tidal offers versus YouTube. And so that's how I was able to find, if you remember the video I put out, what most audiophile systems lack, and video content is one of them. Well, I was able to use Tidal interface to find some of these videos that really stood out to me, and provided the algorithm was great for both audio and video. So that was a huge advantage that I think most people overlook with Tidal. They always think of MQA only. And then let's talk about MQA, whether you're on the MQA Pro, MQA or not. There has been a little bit of shakiness with the science on either side, people argue, but I'm a little bit on the fence of non-MQA, because what I did was, I talked about blind testing in a previous video. You can easily blind test with Tidal. You can put the MQA track and the non-MQA track in the same playlist, put your cursor on random play, close your eyes, hit the button, and then see if you can tell if there's a difference every time you hit the button. And listen as long as you want, or put as many songs in there as you want, and determine whether or not you hear a difference, or can I even identify which one's MQA, which one's not. When push comes to shove and you do this for people, you'll often find that the MQA fans often will choose the non-MQA track as the better one, or they can't hear the difference or whatnot. So from a standpoint of audibility, I don't think it's as big as people like to make it out to be on the forums, because people get in their little camps and they just want to say that they know the best. But I think there is some merit to some of the white-gloved MQA tracks, and certainly some may be better than others. I just didn't find the MQA portion of it to be a differentiating enough factor. But the video aspect for me was MQA and video could put Tidal at the top of your list. But then I moved to Roon with Tidal, and again, you're not going to be able to do the videos with Tidal on using Roon, but you gain all the other features with Roon. So kind of this is integrating a Roon review as well. Roon really takes it up a notch with all the EQ and DSP functions and all the variables that you can get to, including one I'm going to talk about in more detail in a second, that differentiates them on audibility. But in any case, then you could use Qobuz as well, and I didn't really have that much experience with the Qobuz app, but they don't have video. But in Roon, I found Qobuz to be about the same as Tidal, except it doesn't have video, but it is cheaper, and I think their algorithm for me was better in finding music I liked. I found that Tidal was too rap centric, being owned by Jay-Z for most of its life. It was putting too much emphasis on pop, rap, and music that I wasn't that interested in. So Qobuz to me fit my profile, and algorithm paid off better for me. And of course it's cheaper, so that may be a differentiating factor for you. Now within Roon, I think both of them sound about the same. Again, the net forget about MQA, and whatever settings you set in Roon kind of normalizes things. And remember that word normalize. I'll get back to that in a second. But it pretty much normalizes between the two streaming services, and people that have analyzed dynamic range in the two streaming services seem to be about the same. So audibility, when using Roon, I don't think you're going to hear a big difference. There are some tracks though that you'll find in one versus the other, and mastered, remastered, that could cause an audible difference for sure, outside of even the MQA. But then another service I just recently tried was Amazon, and that is not integrated in Roon. So all the features you gain with Roon, DSP, EQ, all these variables that you can massage to your preferences are not available with Amazon. So immediately you think, and that's why it took me so long to even try it. I wasn't that interested in it. I didn't think there's any way it could be that good. But 30-day free trial, I said, why not try it? And sure enough, I was listening and I kept my volume exactly the same because I have both operating at the same time. And I had the volume exactly the same on my preamp. And then when I played the Amazon, it sounded different. And it was somewhat better, but just different. And I was like, what is causing that difference? They're all using, in theory, the same master, and streaming at the same. They're using a flat container. What is making the difference? And then what I noticed, getting to the audibility side of things, that Amazon's player software automatically defaults on the loudness normalization. And so that could change the volume of the track an extra 1, 2, in some cases 9 dB difference if you've got normalization on versus off. And so what is loudness normalization for those that aren't familiar? I did talk about it briefly in the female vocal breakdown. It relates to addressing the issue with compression. With compression, what these mastering engineers have done is similar to what the layperson sees when they watch TV, and they watching a TV show, then the commercial comes on and it's much louder than everything else they were just listening to. Well, that was using compression to boost the loudness of the commercial so it gains more attention in theory. Same thing was done in the music realm for FM radio, but some have gone ridiculous with it. So normalization, just from the standpoint, forget about audibility standpoint of qualitative, just from the standpoint of sabotaging these mastering engineers from continuing to use compression and reducing dynamic range, it's recommended. In my case now, I recommend turning it on any service you're on, because that takes the incentive for people to use that loudness, that compression in mastering. But even being so, there's some differences in the loudness normalization between Amazon and what you can do in Roon. And so I wanted to break down, let me shrink my ugly face and show you. Let's go to my screen here and let's go to some tracks, and let me show you real quick. Okay, 8.6 dB of volume leveling when you turn it on in Roon. Actually, once I did volume leveling in Roon and Amazon, things sounded about the same again, but it still wasn't equal. And the reason being, as I dived into it more, is a couple of factors. One, I'm going to crowdsource the answer to the question and answer for you guys at the end. But the one thing I am definitive on is that making this kind of change in volume leveling, 8.6 dB, I don't have that ability to go to the point, get it totally level between Amazon and Roon to get it totally perfectly matched. And as I showed in the blind testing video, even 1 dB or half dB increments are audible. So when you don't have the ability to level match things, that throws comparisons off. And so I'm going to dive into two tangents real quick, because this is a big deal in the hobby. People make judgments. I see at the shows all the time. They'll go into one room and the other room, listen to the same song, but they listen to them at totally different volumes, even in the same room. And here I'm in the same room, just hearing difference in volumes made a qualitative aspect in what I was hearing, because if you're swinging at 9 dB one way or the other, that excites different dynamics in the recording that you don't hear at 9 dB less or more. It could make certain songs grating and non-grating. When you have that much of a volume difference, it can make a big difference on what you perceive as qualitatively good or bad. So you need to be at least pretty close almost exact, I would recommend in volume leveling when comparing gear and making conclusions, definitive conclusions. You can give anecdotal, judgments, but don't just dismiss the value of volume leveling, because our hearing is not really linear, and then depending on what your volume you're used to and prefer is going to impact how you perceive depending on the volume. Heck, this is the fact. You turn the volume up to whatever you find pleasing. Other people in the same room may think that's too loud. Some may think it's too soft. So we know that each of our ears has is not all linear and exactly the same like a microphone. And even microphones have different calibrations. So again, it's a tangent that I wanted to get off on just to make sure you don't make that same mistake I see most people doing. And the other thing I see people doing, because a lot of this came up to somebody sending me a request to look at this video where two audiophiles were arguing, and they were talking about a streamer software that sounded better in this streamer software than the other one. And that's fine, that can happen. And like I said, you can hear differences even on the same streamer with different services. But the mistake a lot of people make is they never dive into the why. They just chalk it up to, XYZ company has a magic gremlin in their thing that they can do that the other guys don't, and it doesn't work that way. There's usually a why behind one would sound better than the other, unless it's totally in your ear and it's placebo effect or expectation bias, which quite frankly could be. But if it's real, dive into the why. And so what I did, let me turn this off here real quick. And so I was trying to figure out the why, and that's where I found that loudness by default is turned on in the Amazon, where it was off in my Roon, and that's just one setting alone that is a variable that made a pretty noticeable difference, easy to hear. There's also other settings you can make, like DSP, upsampling, headroom management, all kinds of settings. I'm not going to go into all of them, but let's talk about just focus on the loudness one today. Even within Roon, there's not A/B equal apples to apples in loudness with Amazon and with Roon. Amazon, I think there's a metric here that you can choose for your target volume, and it's in this increment metric called LUFs. And with the AES, I did some research. They actually were recommended somewhere between 18 and 20. A lot of people do 13 or 12. The default, I think, for Amazon's is 13. So even between different loudness settings, if you turn them on, you may have different target volume and metrics. There isn't even a 13 option here in Roon, so I can't never get exact apples to volume leveling. And even within track, you can choose track, auto, or album. Album would volume normalize for all the tracks in the album. So if you're listening to an entire album, it will normalize it. Track will be more within the track, normalizing things. There isn't one for playlists, which, by the way, whatever player software can start doing normalizing volume by playlist. That's a big advantage. Hopefully we'll see that soon. But let me just show you real quick. Let's play Easy on Me. I've got track leveling right now. And again, all I'm showing on my screen here, let me back this up. Okay. So I've turned off everything else because Amazon doesn't have upsampling, doesn't have headroom management, anything. So I just wanted to get as much as possible apples to apples. But here they're doing 8.6 dB of volume leveling. I don't know what the Amazon is doing other than I know that their LUF metric is 13. So I would need to set mine to 13 in Roon to get close to a comparison. Or if you're comparing it to no volume leveling, if you want to do that comparison, which I'm going to talk about in a second, you'd have to do, in this case, a difference of 8.6 dB on your dial or your preamp. And can you get to 8.6 exactly? Probably you can't on your preamp. So you may not ever be able to do on or off with volume leveling a total A/B comparison. But jumping around here, hopefully you follow me okay. If I change this to album, then all of a sudden it changed to 11.5 dB of volume leveling. That's crazy. That is just insane. Let's just do an easier track, a more audiophile track, like Diana Krall. How much does she have? Only 3.1. And probably if I do change it to track instead of the entire album, it looks like it actually stays the same. That's interesting. So yeah, when you're getting to 11 dB of volume leveling, that's huge difference, and that tells you just how much compression was used in the recording. So piggybacking on my Adele video, is it audiophile or not? It can sound good, but just know it is compressed, and this will actually show you that. Now, other than volume leveling, you think, okay, all you're doing is hearing the difference in the streaming services. So far what I've described is strictly volume. But here's where I'm crowdsourcing to you guys. I want to know, though, if you don't hear more of a difference than just volume leveling. We've proven that we can't get exact volume leveling between Amazon and the Roon using Tidal or Qobuz, but I can swear that there is a benefit both, well, mainly in distortion. And I've done some research. Some people have actually mentioned better dynamic range and better distortion measurement when they've done some null testing of these streaming services. But I think they were doing Spotify, and so it wasn't really exactly putting the nail on what is causing it. But it does appear that something in the encoding or something could benefit with the normalization on, outside of just you're going to want to do it anyway to thwart these mastering engineers from using compression. But I think there is an additional benefit that I just can't prove yet with measurements or some kind of science that I found. If you guys hear the same thing that I'm hearing, if you can find somebody that's actually done a little more research into this area with the specific services, that would be great. But I'm swearing that I think it's a little bit better, even when you try to volume level it, with the loudness on versus off. So I'm going to deep dive into this more. Just wanted to share this tip with you, because if you're not doing it, you may want to try it yourself and see. It could be a nice improvement for you. But we'll come back to this topic in the future. So sign up, subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.